Hi, third graders. It's Mrs. Mangan. Today we're going to talk about secondary sources. Do you think they are second to primary sources? We've talked an awful lot about primary sources and how wonderful sources of information they are, and how they give us firsthand accounts from people who were there at the time of the event. But do you like reading nonfiction books and who was biographies and magazines and book reviews? Well, I do. And guess what? These are all secondary sources. They all use primary sources to do their research and then wrote their own piece. What are the advantages of using secondary sources? So, if you're doing a research project, would you like to read all of the primary sources? Or are there some advantages to using a secondary source? Let's watch this video and have in the back of our mind the question, what is the advantage of using a secondary source?
Way back in 1703, a massive storm hit the southern coast of England. It was a hurricane known as the Great Storm, and it took over 8,000 lives. Today, we know quite a bit about that storm and what actually happened when it came ashore. We know so much because we have a reliable way to research and document events, places, and people who matter. Using two major kinds of sources, we can establish the facts and information that represent the most accurate version of events. Here's how it works. When an event like the Great Storm happens, there are usually people who witnessed it or experienced it directly. They were there. In the Great Storm, these were residents living on the coast, weather observers, and ship captains, for example. No one else had better information than these people, and in many cases, they provided accounts of what happened via memoirs, interviews, creative writing, scientific documents, and more. These are the primary sources for research about the storm. If you were to write an article about the experience of the Great Storm, the primary sources would be considered the best information because it came from people who were actually there. But for your article, other sources of information may also be helpful. First-hand accounts are great, but can be misleading or inconsistent by themselves. Often, great information can be found from researchers who, many years later, gathered the primary source information and analyzed it. This can uncover new facts and versions of the event, such as the extent of the damage or how it compared to other storms in history. This research has the power to change how we look at the storm. For your article, this is considered a secondary source. So, for any important part of history, you are likely to find two types of sources that can work together to give you a strong sense of the event. There are the primary sources, accounts of people who were there, and secondary sources, documentation and analysis of primary sources and other relevant information after the fact. By understanding the types of sources you have and how to use them in your projects, you can bring your audience the best experience and most accurate information.
So let's look at the advantages of primary sources versus secondary sources that were discussed in this video. Primary sources are people who were there and they witnessed it directly. They wrote diaries and memoirs from what they remembered. And they provided information through interviews and through their data they might have taken with their scientific observation. But there's one problem: people can remember things differently. So when I thought about this, I started thinking about, let's remember when we're back in school and it's after lunch and you've had an argument with your group of friends out at recess. You come inside and you say, Miss Mangan, Miss Luciano, Miss Boyer, Mr. Grazia, we've got to talk to you. And all of a sudden, you all start talking at once. And I say, one at a time. Let's get everybody's story. You were all there on the football field, or you were all there dancing by the shed. However, you all had a different story. How can that be? How can we all remember the same event and have a different version of it? So that's part of the problem with primary sources. Different people can remember things differently. Now, I want to think about me as a secondary source. Your teacher is like the secondary source. They are gathering all of the information from all the different primary sources, synthesizing it, and weeding out the facts of it. Secondary sources, the advantage of the researchers have gathered all that primary information and analyzed it. They can uncover new facts and versions of the events because they have the advantage of gathering so many different primary sources. And they can compare it to other events that have already happened, and that can help them show similarities and differences. So it's that hindsight that is helping them see what happened in a different light. So let's think a little bit deeper. What are the pros and cons of each type of source? So I want you to think, which source do you think you would give information faster? So if you're going to do a report on Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., who we've been talking a lot about during this unit, I'm going to think, what would give you the information more quickly? Watching his whole I Have a Dream speech, going back, finding his birth certificates, finding posters and things from his protests, or would going to a biography book or an encyclopedia entry or going to PebbleGo or TrueFlix, would the primary sources give you that information faster or would the secondary sources give you information faster? I think part of the beauty of secondary sources is that there are quick ways that have already done the hard work of analyzing the primary sources, and it gives you a much quicker way of obtaining information. Which source do you think might have an opinion embedded in it? So that's interesting. Would a primary source have someone's view, or would a secondary source have someone's view? Or do you think it could be both? Well, because if I write a journal entry about something, which is a primary source, it certainly has my opinion on the event. But also, if I am gathering information from different sources for a secondary source, I am still a person. I still can input my opinion on it. So when we look at author bias, it can happen for both types of texts. And then which source do you find more interesting to look at? So, some of us love analyzing and looking closely at these primary sources, but some of us love a great scholastic news where you can open it up and see all of the primary sources that are photographed and put with captions, but enjoy reading the article, the secondary source. So, which one do you find more interesting to look at, or can you see the advantages of both? So, let's take a peek. This is one of the Scholastic News articles about a Civil War woman named Sarah Emma Edmonds, who disguised herself as a man to serve as a soldier and a spy. So, this right here, is this article a primary source or a secondary source? Well, it's a secondary source. You knew that now because let's look. Who wrote this? Karen Kelleher, right? She gathered primary sources to write this article. So, here, we've got several different primary sources that are referenced: photographs, artifacts, documents. So, all of these helped make up the article, which was a secondary source. And all of the hard work is done for you. So, if you need to do some research, it's going to be a lot easier to use this secondary source than it is to analyze all of these primary sources. So, today, what I want you to do is I want us to return to those task cards we did last week. We're going to do the second half of them today. We're going to look through now having another week of knowledge about primary and secondary sources. And you're going to fill out numbers 17 through 32. Remember, you're going to either say A or B on your task card recording sheet, and then you're going to check using the QR code using an iPad or a smartphone. All you do is put the camera up to it, and it will automatically pop up with the answer. So, third graders, I hope you saw the importance and the advantages of secondary sources today. Primary sources get a lot of love. Oh my goodness, they're directly from the source. They're right at the event. But secondary sources have the work done for you. It has someone weeding through and finding several different accounts and gathering the information order to consolidate into one nice source for you to use. So, yes, there are advantages to both types of sources. So, good luck, guys. Enjoy figuring out the task cards. I bet you're going to find you're even better than last week. Have a good day.